Welcome to the third episode of the Social Network Society podcast. The Social Network Society is a community aimed to foster meaningful connections among scholars engaged in research, teaching, and the practice of social networks. In this podcast series, we'll spotlight recently published peer-reviewed articles and uncover more about the fascinating world of social networks through the lens of authors.
This podcast is brought to you by the Social Network Society Communications team and is sponsored by the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Your hosts today are Tomova Shakur, Assistant Professor in the Management and Leadership Department at TCU,
and Jason Ross, Assistant Professor at Western Carolina University.
Today we have the honor of chatting with Raina Brands, who recently got promoted to full professor at the University College London School of Management. She's here to talk with us about her recently published AMR paper in collaboration with Martin Kilduff, titled Multiplex Jeopardy, Dissonant Ties Promotes Gender Bias in Workplace Social Networks.
This groundbreaking conceptual piece explores how dissonant ties, namely those with both positive and negative balance, shape gender inequality in the workplace. The authors propose the concept of multiplex jeopardy and explain how dissonant ties are more likely to harm women as they overlap with gendered stereotypes.
Thank you, Raina, so much for so generously agreeing to be on our podcast. We're so excited to chat with you.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we'll get started. So what made you want to be an academic and more specifically to study social networks?
Well, actually, I've wanted to be an academic for a long time. I wanted the school I went to for primary school was quite close to probably one of the best universities in the country, in Australia. And pretty early on, there was a talk given by a parent who was a doctor, and a child in the audience asked him if he was a doctor or a real doctor, which is when I first found out that there was this title called doctor that it didn't involve medicine. And my father loves to recount the story of how I went to, got home and made a sign for my room, Dr. Raina Brands, and set my sights on a PhD at that point. I took a little deviation into professional services, but it wasn't for me, particularly the constraint of a 9 to 5. So very quickly went back to do my PhD. As for social networks, it wasn't really on my radar until I got to Cambridge. I studied as a psychologist, I trained as a psychologist, and I love social psychology as a paradigm, which should be obvious because so much of my work blends the social psychology paradigm with social networks. But I certainly looking back, I certainly had a sense of the social psychology approach felt incomplete to me. I was looking for something that could contextualize the individual in a more meaningful way than a typical sort of groups paradigm in social psychology, and was exposed to this thinking at Cambridge, and that coincided with Martin Kilduff joining the school, and the rest is history.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about your history and how you got into this topic.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about the origins of this paper?
Sure, yeah. So there were two things happening in parallel, which I think probably gave me the insight, the kind of spark for this paper. So I was working on the Annals piece, I think 2022, I think. Annals piece, and we had put together this proposal to do an Annals on gender. We submitted the proposal that day. Meredith Whaler and her colleagues published their review paper in the Journal of Management, which very much scooped what we had proposed we were going to do. So we had to pivot, and we pivoted into this kind of very theoretical approach of that could differentiate it from this existing review piece. So I was, really reading very exhaustively in the literature from a theoretical perspective, really trying to put together, a summary piece of an Annals is a summary piece and an approach that was some sort of organization and critique and of how social networks literature has approached gender. And I think, so, that was happening academically. And then, at the same time, I had been reflecting on professional experiences that I had had, that people in, my friends, other women professors that I knew had had. And it, had sort of, and that had sort of been building, for a number of years. But, I was starting to have the realization that perhaps, some of the ways that we understood how gender or how social networks should work for women versus men was pretty impoverished. If I think most social networks researchers try and live their research. You've got this opportunity to, you've got this sort of secret knowledge that can be really useful in all aspects of life. And I try to use what we study. And I just had a set of experiences, and I'd had friends with a set of experiences where that approach had failed, and our current sort of research and evidence base didn't really have a good reason why. And so these two things I think probably had to happen side by side to be having to have that kind of insight that there was actually a theoretical piece missing in the literature that I wanted to write about.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was that's how the kind of initial spark was formed.
Okay. Interesting. So I'm curious if you can tell me a little bit more about like how the initial idea and how long it took to go from like your first version of it to ultimately being able to get published. And I mean, like revisions, rejects, did you get things of that nature?
Yeah, so I guess I started writing this in the autumn of 2021. But I didn't. I sort of had a full working draft, so December 2021. And the reason why I know that is because my husband took our baby to Paris for a month, and I had a glorious month. And all I was doing was trying to get a first draft of this paper together. So that's that's when the was sort of writing, the first push on the writing process happened, and then it went to AMR, 3 revisions, and then acceptance, I think April 2025. So we didn't try multiple journals, but it was slightly slower than what I would want it to be. But I had to take 6 months off in 2023, entirely from work. I had a baby, and then I had to have a major surgery, and so that obviously that doesn't just affect one paper; it affects everything. So it's probably shouldn't have taken as long as it did, but. And so Martin and I was working on it by myself, and then Martin joined me as the process unfolded. I asked Martin to join the paper with me.
Thanks for sharing about the journey of the paper. It's so interesting to know exactly how many rounds and how did it come about. So,
I don't want to. Sorry, I feel like I've been saying a lot of I statements. I don't want to underplay Martin's significant contribution to the work.
So what did you think was the biggest challenge of writing this paper?
The biggest challenge for me, and one of the reasons why I eventually asked Martin to join me on the paper, was really resisting the urge to simply write about social psychological processes that we already know exist in the dyad. And I think it's very, it's tempting because you've got a lot to write about because there's a whole evidence base, and it's very hard to kind of set that aside and, actually, drive, push for kind of new theoretical insight into social network dynamics that, we haven't addressed before. So that for me, and I think the summary of that is, wow, it's really hard to write new theory. It's really hard to write new theory. I was a fool for attempting to do it by myself. It was certainly it's much easier. It's much easier when you have somebody to talk to and share ideas with, and it's much more generative approach to collaborate.
What do you love the most about the paper?
What I love most about the paper are what I think of as the two lead ideas. And so the first lead idea is the idea of a multivalence tie, which obviously that's not my idea. I borrowed from Jessica Method's astonishingly insightful treatment of multiplexity. Her writing really sparked a lot of insight for me. But the lead idea is thinking about, okay, so you have these dissonant ties that are characterized by multiple valences, and actually that's how we should think about all relationships, because all relationships have these kind of multiple valences to them. And making that connection between the possibility of a dissonant or an ambivalent tie and the structure of gender stereotypes. And in fact, all stereotypes have this, often have an ambivalent content, is where you have opposing or conflicting valences. And as a way to connect those two literatures, as a kind of lead idea that I think can generate a lot of new research, thinking, theory in social networks and gender research, I love that. And then the other lead idea that I see in the paper is really pushing into to what is happening in the indirect network. Because, as I just said, I think we probably can predict a lot of what might happen in the dyad. There's probably some boundary conditions because these are people who have a relationship interacting, but I still think we can probably borrow quite a lot from stereotype research to understand that process.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happening in the indirect network and how gender bias sort of propagates, flows through those indirect ties. I think, I think there's been an absence of scholarly attention to the indirect network, and so in terms of an insight that I think could be super generative, that would be the second lead idea in my mind.
This is such a great paper, and I think what makes a great paper is when you read it, you keep asking these questions as follow-ups. So one of my follow-up questions that I had, do you think multiplex jeopardy experienced by women appears differently in different industries?
Multiplex jeopardy is simply a term to call attention to the kind of unique harms that arise when women are in these relationships that are dissonant. Those dissonant relationships probably exist in any industry. If you pushed me, I might say, sure, if it's a very kind of male-dominated, male-typed industry, women probably have impoverished networks, and they probably experience a lot of the dislike respect ties based on what we know about women's experiences in those industries. But ultimately it's an empirical question.
Yeah. And do you think that multiplex jeopardy is affected by actual status? So for example, a female PhD student versus a female full professor.
So the question of status is an interesting one, in that, status tends to protect, but when I'm thinking about what's happening in the indirect network, I'm not sure how far status carries. So I think my answer is I'm not sure that status has a unique interaction with some, the theories that we proposed. I think it probably operates in much the same way as we would expect it to operate, say in the dyad or in any stereotyping realm.
But again, an empirical question.
Yeah, empirical question. Yeah.
Yeah. In your opinion, are there some ways in which women can escape the trap of multiplex jeopardy?
Mm. This is the question everybody always wants to ask whenever you present any gender work is, oh, but what can women do? And I think what underlies the question is, one, we just really don't like the message that these very powerful forces exist that limit women. And we all, there's also this undercurrent of almost, and I'm not sure how to phrase this. I think there's a lot of fix the women approaches, right? There must be a way for women to avoid this. What can women do? And it's a question that I always push back strongly on, because I don't think we need to fix the women. We need to fix the systems and processes that give rise to these to these harms.
Mhm.
And the idea that there's something women could be doing to address indirect gender bias that's happening in relationships and conversations that they're not a part of, that they might not even be aware of, that's a that's a heavy lift, right?
Mhm.
We certainly know that people are not stereotypes and stereotyping and the processes that come along with it, these ambivalent emotional experiences we have when stereotypes are engaged. They're not destiny. They're not immune to change and reactance. But yeah, I would always be reluctant to tell women that the onus is on them to do something differently. Uh, I think my advice is that we need to really address the systems and the processes that give rise to this, both at an organizational level and at a societal level, as well as in an interpersonal level. So there's probably not the answer you're hoping for, but that is.
Oh, it's a great answer, and I agree. The onus cannot be on the women. Um, yeah, it's a question of allyship, maybe, and as you said, structural change.
Yeah, allyship, I think, is really important in the indirect network. One of the professional experiences I was reflecting on was the kind of disconnect between what women were told by sponsors, mentors, senior people, and then what was said, behind the backs of those women's. And whether or not that's an outright disparagement or simply damning by faint praise, but the kind of disconnect between receiving what seems like a strong message of professional support, of regard, and then seeing it be quite watered down, if not completely undermined, in interactions happening away from that person.
Mhm.
um that, and obviously you can see that experience is part of the theoretical story that we put together. um so yeah, these conversations, these interactions, these harms are being enacted in interactions, parts of the network where the women who are victims of them aren't necessarily involved. So it does take individuals in those interactions actually being aware, attending to what is happening, and addressing it.
Mhm. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about what's on the horizon? Maybe what papers are you working on currently? What is the most exciting to you at this moment?
The question always makes me laugh. Whenever somebody asks me that question, I always panic and think, there's nothing. I'm not doing anything. I'm not excited about anything.
That can be true.
Obviously not true.
Yeah.
But well, of course, you and I have a collaboration which I'm very excited to write, and I promise I am reading in that process. Weirdly, I'm working on a number of projects around homophily at the moment, which is a bit of a step away from my what I've traditionally done. gender homophily, but also race homophily. So yeah, I'm not leading them, so I don't want to, steal the thunder of my collaborators, but I'm excited to push those projects forward.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I do have to ask this question, so my apologies to the people that be listening through like iTunes and Spotify, but there's an absolutely adorable dog that keeps grabbing my attention. Could you tell us a little bit about that cute baby?
Sure. This is Leo. He's a Labradoodle. He is in his senior years now. He's 8 years old, but you would never know it. He is very sprightly, pretty unhinged, intensely loyal, particularly to me. Doesn't tolerates the children, tolerates my partner, but adores me. That's how I like it. Yeah, but he truly believes every piece of furniture in the house is simply another bed for him, including some of my children's beds. So
Because they are.
yeah,
The whole
no,
house belongs to
not the
him.
beds, not the beds. Yeah, I mean, but he's wrecked. I mean, he's wrecked. So this chair is a set of two. My wonderful former colleague Linda Grattan, when I bought my first apartment, said, "Darling, come over. I've got some furniture that we're taking to France, but you can have it." So she gave me these two beautiful antique chairs and this mirror you can see in the background. And I got them recovered, but he has essentially ruined this beautiful gift to me because he likes to. Right beside him is a bed, but it's not good enough for him. He wants the chair.
He's adorable.
Yeah, he's a sweetie.
Okay. Yeah. So my apologies. We'll pivot back to the paper.
Sure.
But just anytime I see a dog, it's just like, oh my God, it's the greatest little thing ever.
Yeah, he's a good conversation piece. I remember, at the beginning of Zoom, the pandemic Zoom life, we were all, backgrounds. Jason, you look like you got a background on. But now I think I read a piece of research saying people connect with you better if you just let it all, let it all be transparent behind you. So often in exec ed webinars, he'll, strut past in the background. He's a good conversation piece.
Right. Jason, you and I need to change our backgrounds.
Yes, we do. So I don't know if I actually want to. Do I want anyone to know how messy I actually am? So
what's behind you, Jason? Your office?
Yeah.
Today it's the office. Generally not though. So just completely random stuff piled up.
You've got a good green screen though, because you're not disappearing into it. It's a good setup.
That's true.
So I guess, do you have any kind of advice for junior faculty who study topics around like social networks or networking to invest time in writing AMRs, do more empirical work, potentially both? Just kind of what are your thoughts around that?
I'm going to recycle advice that I was given, which I think is very good advice, having lived it. And I wouldn't encourage you to attempt an AMR if you are a PhD student or quite junior in your career, unless you're collaborating with somebody who's very experienced and who is leading. Actually, I think it's very difficult. As you both know, what you spend most of your time doing in a PhD is getting across this huge evidence base and then trying to figure out a place for you to make a novel contribution to it. And I think it probably takes many years past the PhD to really have the kind of depth and command of the entire evidence base to even attempt to have enough for an AMR. It's quite easy to find, not easy. Well, why would I say that? It's a smaller hurdle to find, a theoretical novelty for an empirical paper, but to have a theoretical idea that has enough traction to write a whole AMR, and one that necessitates an AMR as opposed to an empirical piece, because that's one thing AMR pushes back on a lot, is a paper that should just be an empirical paper that people just write it into a theoretical piece. There's a kind of nuance there, that the idea has to be novel enough that it warrants, in a paper that is paper length and all theoretical exposition, as opposed to, 4 studies showing the idea or showing the truth of the idea. So if I look at my own if a trajectory in the field, although I had always aspired to write an AMR, I didn't, I've got maybe 3 or 4 folders on my computer or drive, OneDrive, of attempts to to find enough traction. It wasn't, until I was, whatever, how many years in, probably 8-ish, 7, 8-ish, that I really had the command of the literature to have that insight.
Mhm. That's really insightful. And pragmatically speaking, if it doesn't work at AMR, there are not that many outlets to go to after.
Yeah, I was about to say that, it is a high risk strategy, because I think organization science sometimes, publishes these perspectives pieces, but yeah, it's a high risk strategy. There's really, if you're at a school that demands, top journal publications, as I am, it is, you could burn a lot of years writing an AMR, perhaps going through the revision process and ultimately not succeeding. So yeah, I probably wouldn't say to prioritize it. Having said that, I've just started, and when I say just started, I mean just started an AMR in collaboration with another professor at the school, but also a PhD student and a postdoc. But I think the idea is that the 2 seniors will certainly be leading the kind of intellectual development of that work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as a follow-up, what do you think about writing for annals? Do you have a similar sentiment?
I found it easier to write the annals than I did the AMR. And a lot of annals is about organizing the literature. It's not just a review. It's very much transitioned away from just a summary review of the literature. You have to kind of have a perspective and an angle that you want to forward, but that should fall out of the existing evidence base. So provided you have enough domain knowledge, you can certainly read everything and toy with kind of different arrangements and different perspectives. I wouldn't recommend that a PhD student try and lead in annals, but perhaps as a collaborator, again with someone more senior, it would certainly force you to read, very exhaustively. It forced me to read papers I would never otherwise have picked up, and in that way, so as you both know, as everyone who works in academia knows, the hardest thing is just keeping up with the literature. So in terms of forcing you to sit down and exhaustively read everything and reflect on it, organize it, think about it, it's very valuable.
And perhaps it's a way to build that command of the literature that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I think from a pragmatic point of view, it also depends on how much annals is valued at your institution.
Yeah.
Yeah, some institutions value it more than others,
Right.
and there's no such thing as an easy publication. I think it's tempting to think that an annals or an AMR must be easy because there's no data, but they all take a long time to write, and every hour you spend on one of them, you're not spending on something else. So you have to be, I think, quite ruthless in pruning down what you're working on and focusing on the most promising pieces in your pipeline, especially if you're junior.
Yeah. And that is really hard to do, right? Because I'm sure you all experience that, but I get really attached to to my project. So cutting things that are not getting through, the revision process is really hard. I think maybe that's a skill that all of us have to cultivate.
Yeah, but if I could give a sort of longer term perspective on that, there's been a bunch. There's been projects that I've cut, and believed they'd been dead forever, and then, revive them as the landscape changes. So the paper I published in Personnel Psychology about women entrepreneurs, I sort of cut that. It got R&R'd at every journal you can think of, and never made it through the next the next hurdle. And then, but it was a great fit for that special issue. Another paper that I'd sort of given up on, I felt, having had some success, in a particular journal, I thought, I'll see how it goes at that journal. And yeah, so you can put paper, if it makes it easier, you can, rather than saying I'm killing that paper, you can put it aside and revisit it when when things change, the landscape shifts.
Yeah, the landscape shifts, and now you also might have a different perspective in how you write the story. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any other general advice or tips for junior faculty?
I think this is hard to do, but if I could go back in time and start my career again, because I didn't become I didn't become aware of it until recently, but to maintain a relentless promotion focus. I think it's so easy to slip into a prevention focus, and of course we know all about how much a prevention focus doesn't help you do the sort of work that we do. So just be ruthless, relentless, and unwavering in adopting a promotion focus to everything you do, but particularly to research.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for the advice.
Of course. Always happy to give unsolicited advice and solicited advice. It's my favorite thing to do.
Great. This was really insightful. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us. I am walking away with a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
We love talking to Raina and learned so much about the behind the scenes of this conceptual piece. She gave great advice to junior scholars and most generally people attempting to write AMRs.
If you liked today's episode, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We're looking forward to getting your feedback. If you have any suggestions, feel free to email us at communications.sns@gmail.com. We look forward to touching base with you.